So anyway, let us start at the beginning. I hope that all of you have access, or as many as possible have access to the chat, because there will be a couple of questions as we go through. I want to make this as interactive as possible. My focus today, if you have read the abstract, which I hope you have, because people took a lot of time and trouble getting it out there, is going to be on primary, and it's going to be on a subject that was really one of the first things I faced when I started this job 20 years ago. The idea of introducing learners to the sounds and shapes of the English language. I do remember very, very clearly on literally my first trip abroad, which just happened to be in Russia. And at the time we had a new book out called Letter Fun, which took a very, at the time, kind of modern approach to teaching learners the basics of the alphabet and the sounds that are connected with the letters, the phonic approach with which I'm sure you're familiar. And one of my colleagues came rushing into the office. I'd never met her before. She kind of rushed into the office like a tornado and said, "Do you really expect that learners will be able to learn to read and write in this way?" And I basically just had to say, well, look, just try it and see. And a year or so later, she turned out to be a great fan of that particular approach. So what we're going to be talking about today are ideas connected to the teaching of reading and writing at the lower levels, at primary level. And I make no apologies for doing this, because to be honest with you, I could not do another presentation about teaching online and teaching digitally. A lot of us have had a lot of experience of that now, and I really just wanted to talk about something more methodological, more to do with day-to-day business in the classroom. So if you will just give me 1 second to do the traditional sharing of the screen, because as we know, sharing is caring. Let me just click the screen share button, and you will need sound. So that's that. And I wish to share my PowerPoint presentation, and there's that. No, not you, that one. Okay. I am hopeful that you guys can now all see my presentation. I'm also keeping my eye on someone says that they can't see the presentation. Could people confirm that they can actually see the presentation for me, guys? Yeah. If that would be possible. Yeah, yes, it's there.
Yes, we can. It wasn't put on yet then when the person asked. So
oh, they were in a hurry.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much again. This is the frightening thing about this. I mean, I'm looking into a camera with a wall behind it, and it really is not ideal, as we all know. Thank you so much for confirming. Okay, so we're going to be looking at the sound and shape of words. I would like to start with a short video. Some of you may have come across it before. If you have, it's still worth a watch again. For those of you that haven't seen it, it is taken from I think it was 1950s television show, I Love Lucy. Very famous show in the United States and syndicated around the world. And this is a wonderful moment. Lucy's husband, the character of Lucy, if you're not familiar, is Cuban, if I remember correctly, Ricky. His native language is Spanish. And they're having a discussion about the vagaries of the English language. As I said, forgive me if you see it, but I Love Lucy sketches are always worth another watch. Let's hope you can see this.
Ricky Ricardo. Here, honey, I'll show you what I mean. Now, you take this book and pretend that our child has come to you and said, "Daddy, read me a good night story."
All right.
There you are, Daddy.
Oh, what happened there? Oh, no.
Freeze. Once upon a time, in the woods lived a peasant. He was a good man with a noble heart. He spent his time in the forest cutting down bushes from the trees. Cutting wood.
Wait, just a minute. What is this bouges?
Bushes, right in there.
That's boughs.
B-O-U-G-H is bow?
Right.
Bow. He spent his time in the forest cutting down boughs from the trees. Cutting wood all day made his hands strong and raw. One day...
That's rough.
Spelled the same way as the other. O-U-G-H.
That's right. That shows how little you know about the English language.
So I made a little mistake. Made his hands strong and rough. One day he cut wood so fast that by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, his day's work was through. When the...
Hold it, Shakespeare.
Through?
T-H-R-O-U-G-H is pronounced through.
Through, that's what I always say. Now stop picking on me, will you? You're getting me all confused. His day's work was through. It started to rain on the way home, and he got so wet that his nose became red, and he developed a hacking... Cool? Well, I know it can't be cow.
It's cough.
Oh, that did it. I had enough. Or should I say, enough? Enough. I don't see why you have to have such a crazy language anyway. In Spanish, you don't have all those ow, o, oo, of, oof sounds. In Spanish, you got a sound, it sounds the same all the time. You write it the same way, it sounds the same way. No matter where you put it, it comes out the same way.
Okay, one of you has indicated that you found that funny. And certainly it's very clever. And it speaks to a truth that many people coming to learn English often encounter: the lack of logic between the sounds and the way they are written. Now, there are historical reasons for that. One of them being, of course, in the UK, that we, not the UK, in England, I should say, at that time. In England, we had the great vowel shift, where the pronunciation changed over a period of about 3 centuries or so, moving from the back of the throat to more frontally formed sounds. Unfortunately, the spelling system for certain words remained in the old form. Some of the newer words were spelt with newer spelling systems, and to be honest, it has not been standardized. So, of course, you have that problem in English, that there is not always a direct correspondence between what we see and what we say or what we hear. It's not always the same in other languages. I think this is partially because some languages came to be written after they'd completely, or their sounds had more or less formed. That certainly, I think, is an issue. And sometimes it just naturally developed that way, I think. In Greek, which is my second language, then, for example, the letter alpha is always pronounced as an A sound. In Italian, I'm not an Italian speaker, but if I remember correctly, it's pronounced the same way. However, in English, the letter A can be variously pronounced as A, as in cat, and then you've got the O sound, and then you've got the R sound, and so on and so forth, represented by the one letter. Not very helpful. I didn't design it. It's not really my fault. And the same with things like consonant clusters, etc. So in Greek, nitaf is a D sound. Occasionally, it takes a slight nasalization, nd. In Italian, the CH is a K. And of course, with a consonant blend like the TH in English, it could either be th or the, depending on where it is within the sentence or within the word. So I have to apologize because I do know that it is terribly difficult for learners coming into the English language to try and follow this. And the truth is, a lot of the time, there is no logic. And the truth is that quite simply, sometimes it's just a question of, I'm afraid that's the way it is. We simply have to learn it, which is not very fair and not very good educational policy, but that is the nature of the beast. In fact, when I talk to people who are learning English, especially students, one of the things when I say, you know, what do you find difficult about learning English? In fact, there are two popular answers. There is this whole idea of the spelling system, and there is the ever popular phrasal verbs, which a lot of people also have issues with. We're not going to talk about phrasal verbs today. We shall remain talking about the learning of the spelling system, etc. Now, if you could move your fingers near to your keyboard. Let me just rearrange my desktop just a little bit there, and I'm going to move the chat to where I can see it. There we go. Okay, so we're going to have a quick quiz, I hope, if my computer works. Okay, so those of you who have access to the chat, please type in your answers. Please don't go onto your microphones. You understand that that would be very confusing and difficult because Zoom has a habit of sometimes cutting people out if two people are talking at the same time. So our first question is, he said, hopefully, there we go. This is a kind of a trick question, so think carefully about it. How many characters in the English language? I gotcha. Because all of you are putting 26, and it was a trick question, and I'm being terribly mean. Okay, I'm not normally a mean person, but that was a mean question. The answer is actually double that. The answer is actually 52. Now, why could anyone tell me why I am making that somewhat ludicrous claim? Why? It's nothing to do with the sounds. We're looking at the characters. There we go. Thank you very much, Katerina. We have the characters, the letter shapes, the individual letter shapes are actually doubled because we have lowercase and uppercase. Now, I know that sounds a silly distinction, but if you think, for example, about the lowercase b and the uppercase b, for example, there, how we normally write lowercase r and how normally uppercase r is represented, just for examples, there isn't necessarily a logical connection between them. I agree in some letters there is, or lowercase d and uppercase d, for example. So our learners do have to learn to recognize 52 characters, not just the 26 that we think of as the individual letters of the alphabet. Notice I did say characters, which is the printed form of the letter. So I wasn't really cheating, but I know I was being a little bit mean. Forgive me for that. You're nice. So now this is one of those things where there's a bit of dispute. Roughly, how many sounds are there in the English language? How many phonemes are there in the English language? Ooh, well done. I suspected we might get correct answers. You guys are very good on these kinds of things. Yeah, the figure normally given is around 44. They do make some, they give some kind of leeway for example, local accents, etc., where certain other sounds might come in. But it's around 44. Okay, let's have a look at the next one. We've got a few more here. So, come on, appear on the screen. There we go. How many forms of spelling represent the sounds of English? Again, give me a rough guess. How many different ways are there of spelling the sounds in English? Remembering that we're going to talk about this later, that some sounds can be represented in more than one way. Not mathematicians. If you were, we wouldn't always have so much fun when I come over there. Several. In fact, there may be around 250 if you look at it. This is the answer that you get from linguists. Consonant clusters. Now I'm really testing you here. I'm really just sharing ideas with you. And looking at the difficulties. Consonant clusters divided into initial at the beginning of the word. This is consonants stuck together at the beginning, at the end of a word. And again, we're looking for around. No idea. I'll be honest, these are things I learn as I go along as well. There are more initial consonant clusters than there are final consonant clusters. And interestingly, the initial consonant clusters tend to be shorter. The majority of them are 2. There are some that can get up to about 3, for example, STR in street, for example. In terms of final consonant clusters, in terms of the sounds, certainly you can get up to 5, but it's the word angsts, which is a borrowed word from German, so possibly doesn't count. But words like twelfths have, I'm reading it because my spelling is really bad, LFTHS at the end, but those are very rare. Normally you can get just the, it's usually around 3 or 4, and usually 2 at the beginning of a word. And remember, those are important. Yeah, we can't learn language without these things. Now, what I'm trying to do in this little quiz, apart from trying to get people involved, is also to point out, as if you didn't know, the difficulties of the language and try and explain where some of those difficulties come from. There is not direct correspondence. There are a bunch of different consonant clusters that learners have to learn the sounds of, and not just once, but maybe the way that cluster can sound different in different words. It is a very, very confusing thing. So let us move to the last one. Why have uppercase letters increased in importance? This is a bonus question. It's not a linguistics question. Why have uppercase letters, capital letters, increased in importance? And many of you have the answer right in front of you. Anyone care to guess? Why capital letters? Exactly, thank you. You got it. Computer use. Most computer keyboards, for example, are written, the keys are labeled with capital letters. Certainly the earlier mobile phones that came out also use capitals, although to be fair, smartphone keyboards do not. That has changed. But certainly if you look at a computer keyboard, it's laid out in capital letters, although the letter produced is lowercase, which seems a little illogical, and I don't know the reason behind it. So this is one of the reasons, again, why learners need to be able to recognize the correlation. It goes back to the first question, the correlation between lower and uppercase. Okay, so let us move on. So what are issues with learning English? One of the biggest problems we've had, just to review, is that a letter, a grapheme, may represent more than one phoneme. For example, short and long vowels. And again, based on things like the great vowel shift, historical reasons, loan words, remembering, of course, that English has a lot of loan words that have come in. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why it is this illogical. And of course, a sound may be represented by more than one letter. For example, a quick example, the letter K, as you well know, can be represented by a C or a K. Yeah. So our learners have to deal with all this, and it's a lot to ask them. Remember that when we're looking at these kind of primary levels, learners are not necessarily fully literate in their own language yet. They'll be more advanced, obviously, but depending on where we introduce the alphabet to our lower level learners, then it's going to be, it's cognitively a very, very difficult thing for them to be able to deal with. There's a lot going on in their minds at that time. Now, well, no, I'll come to that point later on. I'm not going to throw things in. I'm sorry, I love talking about this kind of thing and I get carried away with myself. Oops, sorry, my computer is running a bit slow. I don't know why. Another example there is the f sound, the f sound, which is always fun to do in studios. PH, F, GH, and double F all make the same sound. Okay, so let us move on. I'm going to come to my next point now. I'm sorry, I have a number of things on my screen and my computer is not being as cooperative as I would hope. So we're going to be thinking about things like, well, why teach the alphabet? Well, for one reason, for things that learners have to do, for example, at A2 level, learners will need the alphabet in order to be able to spell out words, for example, and also to be able to consult, to start to learn to consult things like dictionaries, etc. So it is important that they learn the alphabet. It is important that they move to that as quickly and as painlessly as possible to be able to carry out some very, very basic tasks. But it is very important as well for their development in language and their comprehension of text, that they learn to be able to associate the sound of the word with the image of the word quite quickly. Please remember that learners are at a lower level. It doesn't necessarily mean young learners, by the way. Learners at a lower level of competence in a language, when they're looking at the written form of the word, in order to be able to comprehend the text, the first thing they will do at the lower levels is essentially sound out the word in their head. And it is the sound of the word rather than the image of the word that is going to help them get to the meaning of the word. Because, and this is very important, reading and writing are not natural skills. If you are not educated in the formal sense, you will not learn to read and write. You will learn to speak and you will learn to listen, but you will not learn to read and write. These are skills that we have developed for very practical reasons, and they're very beneficial to our society as a whole, and it's great that we did. But the brain still has to deal with them in different ways. The most natural way of understanding what is being said is to hear it. So when we have learners who are inexperienced in language, and we're trying to get them to comprehend what is written in front of them, that comprehension very much relies on the sound that they make internally or externally in some cases. You will have seen learners mouthing words or reading quietly aloud as they read, because it's the sound that takes them to the concept, that takes them to the meaning. When they get more proficient, then the image of the word directly triggers the concept, and we don't have to go via sound. So the faster we can get learners to recognize the image of the word, the more practice we can give them, the faster they will be able to comprehend what we're asking them to read. And of course, once they can do that, then they have so much more opportunity to pick up new language, to get interested in language because they're learning things by reading about them, etc., etc., etc. And they'll be able to chat with people on WhatsApp and do all their social media and everything else as well when it is age appropriate. When is it appropriate to start learning the alphabet then? Please notice I'm not necessarily talking here about reading and writing. You can start reading and writing without actually learning the list of the alphabet. And this is something that has changed a lot over the years. In this particular statement, I'm thinking of the A, B, C, D, E as a memory thing. Certainly they need to be able to do that, as we said, by A2 level, but also there can be some confusion. As we've mentioned already, the shapes of the letters are very arbitrary. You know, we're just associating them with various sounds, and it's a very arbitrary and way of codifying things. And as we've already pointed out, there is a problem between the fact that certain letters can be pronounced differently. Yeah. So, for example, we learned that a C can be pronounced as a S sound rather than a hard C, and then we see a word like cat and we might mispronounce it as sat, etc. So learning the letters C as a name of a letter is not necessarily helpful in teaching me to pronounce C and understand the pronunciation of C in a word, and therefore get to the concept of a cuddly, furry thing to which I am allergic. So it is arguable that we can teach reading and writing without first going to the naming of the letters in the alphabet. And this was the approach, for example, I mentioned earlier on when we were dealing with Letter Fun, that we didn't actually introduce the names of the letters until the end of the course. And that's what was freaking my later very good friend out, because she was used to a system where the names of the letters were given and then the pronunciation later on. This may be confusing. So one of the things that we do in a newer approach to this is to teach it phonically rather than go straight to the kind of the names of the letters, okay? So we can do that a bit later, if you like. What can cause confusion, as I've just mentioned, yeah? Sorry, I get carried away and I don't always wait for my bullet points. The confusion can be caused by this lack of correlation between name of letter and pronunciation of letter and all the other things we've mentioned and we saw in that video that can be very, very confusing for our learners. So how can we teach this? Now, obviously, I'm talking about a methodology that we encourage, and I am going to use examples from a primary level material. Tell you the name at the end, it doesn't matter right now. But what I'm going to suggest is a kind of methodological approach which you might like to adopt. And I'm going to talk about some techniques and ideas that you might want to use, and they're not tied to a particular course book or anything like that. But this is what we've learned with the experts that we've worked with from my own experience of teaching at kindergarten and primary level, and from conversations with colleagues around the world, of a more kind of systematic approach, not a random approach to teaching learners to read and then to go on to writing later on. So first things that make sense, and this is why to a certain extent teaching the old-fashioned form of the alphabet, A is for apple, B is for ball, etc., etc., etc. They're great ways of remembering some of the associations, but we would be teaching learners things that weren't necessarily necessary at that particular moment. There are different frequencies with which individual sounds, etc., come up. So what was felt very important, the way we're recommending that this is approached, is that we take the most common combinations, the most common sounds first, and move from those. And of course, this is based on research, based on analyses of frequency, etc., of the sounds that come up in English, the most common. So we do tend to start with the common ones first. Okay, so things like the B, P, T, D, L, M in terms of consonants, and the simple vowel sounds as well. So if you are going to be teaching anybody the basics of reading and writing and sound and letter combinations, please do bear in mind that, for example, teaching them a Y on the first day, not necessary. Yeah, we start with the simple, most common things first and then move forward. We don't ignore them, but we control it and move forward. And control is very important here, ladies and gentlemen. Control is important because we don't want to overload our learners. Remember, I said it's cognitively very, very difficult. And we also want what they learn to be reinforced in words, etc., that they're going to encounter most. Yeah. We'll talk about sight words in just a few minutes. But when we're looking at sounding out words, which we've never seen before, it makes sense to start with focusing on the more common and moving forward. Now, obviously, I don't mean, a few letters a month, so we do these 6 letters in 1 month and we don't do anything else. No, we can keep moving forward throughout the month. Yeah. It's not a question of, just working with these and nothing else, but the progression is important so that learners can then see it reflected in what they're reading. So let us move forward because there's some more fun things I want to do with you in just a bit. By the way, for those of you who aren't familiar, because there's a lot of terminology here, CVC, consonant, vowel, consonant words. So things like bed, dog, etc., pen, so on and so forth. Okay, so we're teaching common letters with common words. Then we would move on to issues, when we've got through all the basics there, the most common things like consonant blends. Now, please remember that if we're looking at this, the difference between a consonant blend and a digraph, a consonant blend maintains the sounds of the original letters. So, for example, the ST is, you still got the st, you still have the 2 sounds coming together, but they've kind of been squished into one unit. Br, etc. It just means etc. It's not a word I'm teaching learners. Okay, so we're going to teach those and get learners to learn that in consonant blends, we are getting 2 sounds. And that's really quite important, okay, in terms of their pronunciation as well. and also for when they're listening, so that they can hear and interpret that and understand. So if they hear the word stop, for example, they will slowly know how that is written because they've been exposed to this idea of consonant blends, and they'll be able to hear them and hopefully identify them when they're reading as well. So exercises are just squidging things together, reinforcing that the sound is there. So you've got B and L. And please notice I'm not saying B and L. If I say B and L make bl, as in black, that's not helpful. So when we're teaching at these levels, we stick with the sound B, L, L, in fact, B, L, black, yeah? So it sounds really stupid, but that makes sense because we're teaching them how these are built. So just spelling it out ain't helpful, especially if they're not comfortable with those associations of the names of the letters and the sounds of the letters. Okay, so when we do this, we have it recorded. If you're going to do it, please remember not to spell out the letter. Sorry, not to name the letters, okay? And practice in that, you know, just getting them to bump, bump equals, all right? Practice in that, but that separation is important because they have to learn the difference between those and digraphs. So we got here, we do have one sound. This is not a sh, or a kh, which would be fun, but it's not. So you've got the sh and the ch, which is one sound. This is why I say it's important that we get them to see that the ones in the previous slide have a kind of two sound thing going on, an initial and a final. And when we're looking at digraphs, then they only make the one sound. Yeah. And I don't know, for my Greek students, these sounds were incredibly difficult, the sh and the ch, because they don't have them in Greek. And again, in Greek, that there's this concept of two letters making one sound with very rare exceptions. The one like the nitaf I showed you is not common in Greek. Okay, so sh always ended up coming out as s. Now I know this is pronunciation, but it's just interesting how difficult some of these concepts can be if they're not familiar to you in your own language. And even now, competent speakers of Greek will still say, they'll see sh, but they'll say s. It's one of those things. So learning that these are individual sounds is the next step. Once we've done that, we take it one step further. We're going to come on to some activities in a minute. I just want to show you the kind of procession that we think is important. The magic E, known linguistically as the split digraph. So the E alters the sound of the A, but the E itself isn't sounded, but there is a consonant in the middle, as you well know, you know, so short A becomes long A, etc. So now you see what I'm trying to say here is that there is a sequence to this, which again, if we just stick to words from A, from B to C to D, there's no sequence, there's no logic behind it. What I'm stressing here is there needs to be a progression and a logic to what we're doing, okay? So we go with examples. Sam goes to same, Tim goes to time. Now, do I need to tell them it's a split vowel digraph? No. We can use the magic E. That's a nice way of putting it. It's magic because it alters the sound of the previous vowel. And we introduce them to that in common words. Okay, so this is the next thing. All right. And then the progression we are suggesting is the idea of vowel digraphs, two vowel sounds making one sound: rain, down, house, around, etc. Okay, these come next in our list because again, it's just moving them forward through things they're most likely to meet. In many of the words we use at primary level, certainly at the beginning, they're more likely to come across words with the magic E than they are necessarily going to come across a lot of the digraphs, the written form there for one vowel sound. Okay, I want to zoom through these a bit because I want to show you some practical activities and ask you a few more questions. But it is important you see that we do think there's a progression here. Make learners aware. Yeah, this again, now just letting them know that how we start building the sounds of words, initial, mid, and final position. So st, op, l, o, st. This is how we get them to sound it out. And of course, once you start running those together, because now we've seen the digraph for ST, yeah, so we know that sound is a st. So we can put it into a word as we sound it out. St, op, l, o, st. And this again is why I say it's very important that we use the sounds of the words rather than the letters, because now I can start building the sounds. Okay, and as you run them together, obviously you get to the more natural sound of the word. But this is very, very important indeed. And this is why we teach the digraphs first, and then we move into this particular activity. Now, this is where it all starts to get really fun. And I'll be honest with you, it is one of those things where we just have to say to learners, to be honest, this is just the way it is. That sometimes the same sound can be spelled in different ways, as we looked in the quiz, and sometimes a word that looks like it's spelled the same is pronounced differently. This is the heart of the problems that Ricky was having in I Love Lucy. It is the heart of many, many problems when learners are practicing reading, writing, and speaking English from written forms. So you've got, now this, by the way, if you speak American English, this particular activity is slightly different. Here, in British English, footballer, singer, sailor, inventor have the same schwa kind of ending. If you're American, it is actually different. So if we were doing this for an American audience, we would have to change those examples, because sailor is pronounced slightly differently in American from, for example, singer. And at the bottom there, you have the problem of same spelling, different sound. Boot and root, double O. Cook and book, different sound, same spelling. Pour and floor, same sound. Same spelling, different sound. Okay, so this is just a matter of practice. But what we can do is open learners' minds to the fact that there are different sounds. Now, there aren't unlimited different sounds. There is a limited number of different sounds, and this practice will help them. But you can see, again, this is a far more complex idea than we were talking about right at the beginning. So we've gone from the very simple, common ideas to the more complex ideas, not to get them into cognitive overload, not to confuse them any more than is necessary. This is what we're doing here. Now, time for a quick question to you. The sound, okay, that hard C sound. From the words on the left, you've got duck, kitten, queen, school, cat. Have a quick, I'm sorry, I don't understand the question about the hook sound. The ones I had in the book were just examples. It wasn't meant to be an exhaustive list. Again, it's based on the most common sounds produced. Okay, so I agree. Hook is it falls into that category, but we're not trying to teach them every single variation at that particular moment. Okay, well, hook, cook is actually quite similar in my English, but that may depend on local pronunciations. Okay, so we've got these words. I would like you just to think very quickly which you think is the most common spelling for the k sound to the least frequent spelling. Which is the most common way it is written to the least written? Just have a think about it. I'm not going to ask you to write it in the chat, because that would take a long time, and I don't want to put you to that trouble. But just, for your own curiosity, okay, you've had to think about it. So the most popular, most common word of spelling, the hard K sound, the hard C sound, my apologies, saying and reading at the same time, never a good idea, is, of course, he said, hoping this computer was going to do something, there we go, the actual letter C. That, of course, no surprise, is followed by kitten. And then we have duck, the CK, K, the CH, okay, the digraph there. And then we have the Qu for queen. So again, what I'm trying to indicate here is that there is access to the frequencies of these written forms of the sounds. and we use these to guide us through. And again, this is information you can find out. So if you're planning your own teaching of basic reading with primary learners, you can access websites where you look at most frequent words, most frequent spellings, etc. There is help there to help you plan that. The important thing that is that you do, so that we don't jump to necessarily the Q as the K sound, as the K sound, yeah? Because if we do, they're going to associate it with that, and that's certainly not the most common form. The most common forms are the ones that you see in front of you. Just another quick one here with the E sound. Thinking again, this is the last one of these, very quickly, from the most frequent form of it being written to the least frequent form of it being written. How do we normally or most commonly write the E sound? And what is the least common way of doing that? Okay, I've given you some time to think, and we shall have a look. Obviously, the single E. Then interestingly, it's actually, you've got the diphthong here, the EA sound, okay? And then you've got the double E, EY, and then the single Y. It's interesting there because I would have thought, I'll be honest with you, that it was the single E, then the double E, but it's not. It's the single E and then the EA there. So that was actually, when we were going through this with our experts, this was one of the things that it just struck me, because I would definitely have gone for the double E because it just seemed logical. But no, the frequency is actually EA, then double E. So you live and learn. That's the wonder of this job, okay? So when we are going through, when we're teaching them, we need to be guided by these kinds of frequencies, yeah? So we teach them in that kind of order. Now I'm going to move on to practical levels now, because I want to make sure we have time to give you some practical exercises and things you can do. So when we're teaching this, we've decided on a structure now. And again, there is help for you out there if you want to do it, but structure is the key. That's what I want to emphasize here. Learners need to practice things like blending and segmenting. So blending is like I showed you before, where you get individual letters or digraphs, whatever it is, and then learners have to sound them individually and put them into one word. And then, of course, segmenting is the opposite, when you take a word and you sound out the individual sounds. So, for example, box, box, at. So we identify the individual sounds that make up that word while we're looking at it as well, so that learners learn to see what goes together. For example, later on, things like the CH or whatever, and what are individual sounds as well. And of course, they get to practice the sounds that we've already taught them that can be associated with those letters as well. Okay, because we've got that out of the way. Blending, segmenting. A fun thing to do is what's called phoneme manipulation, which is where you basically get them to remember. Okay, so here in this particular activity, for example, and if you have flashcards, if you've been using flashcards, and maybe you could use some of your flashcards to an activity like this. So if you've got big, okay, you're going to keep the B. What are you going to put there to make ox? Yeah. So getting learners to play about with them and manipulate them. Of course, this comes after the previous work we've looked at. Okay, and in our case, they're based on words they've already met. These are not new words. So if you've been using things like flashcards, etc., maybe you could use the images of the flashcards and ask them if there's a common letter, give them the common letter, and then ask them what other letters they would need and sound that out. Because remember, here we're looking at reading, we're looking at spelling things as well as part of that. Yeah, we're looking at all of these things going on. It's kind of a fun thing to do. It's not that difficult, but it can be a little bit more difficult. Now, one of the important things as well when we're at these levels is sight words. Remember, right at the beginning, I said that reading speed and confidence with reading will come when we no longer sound words out, but when we just recognize the image, okay? Now, one of the things that we suggest you do, and this can be done with things like flashcards, is you take high frequency words and they just learn to look at them as a unit. And one of the things we do in our course books, for example, for sight words, is we select words, for example, that are going to be used in instructions, because these are words they're going to encounter a lot, and we don't want them having to sound them out. So we give them words that are commonly found in the book, and we train them to use these as sight words, literally just to look at them, remember the shape, and get to the concept. Now, if you're using things like flashcards or whatever material you've made up, you can take the most common of those words and treat them as sight words. Now, one of the reasons why sight words are important is because sight words, first and foremost, don't necessarily obey the rules. It can be very weird for reasons I'll talk about in just a second, but they make up a huge amount of what we read. Yeah, about 25 sight words, if you've learned them, is about 25% of the things we normally read and write. I'll demonstrate that in just a sec. 100 words, again, these are approximate figures, okay? Many sight words, and this is why it's useful to treat them as sight words, are phonetically irregular. Now, one of the reasons why this happens is because a lot of the most common words in English, despite what some of my Greek friends would insist, most of the common words in English, the majority of the 100 most common words in English come from older English roots. Okay, so the shorter words, they tend to be. The ones we use most commonly in English every day are actually based on older English roots coming from things like Saxon, etc., going back to some Celtic words and so on and so forth, some Norse words. They are still very common in English. They don't necessarily lend themselves to being sounded out. For example, the KN, all of these things there can be very difficult for learners. So if we learn just to recognize certain of these words, then we are going to speed up our reading because we're not trying to sound them out. We can just look. Just for your information, because I found this and I thought it would be fun, there is a list of the first 25 of these, and you can see how common they really, really are, that learners really need to be able to just recognize this and not have to worry about them, okay? Some of them are straightforward in their pronunciation, some of them are not. So that's the first 12, and then the next one of the first 25, okay? Now, we would recommend that these are taught, as I said, as sight words. Why? So that when they start reading, they will not have to think about them, they will know what they mean. Obviously, we don't learn these in one day. But along with learning some of our basic words, and this can be done in tandem, as long as we don't do too many of them. So, for example, we can be teaching the basic sounds and the basic combinations and throw in a few sight words where we basically just say, look at this word. This word is for. Okay, everybody say for. We don't necessarily sound it out. We show them the image of the word. We pronounce it. We explain what it means, and we leave it at that, okay? And that building up of these sight words gradually will help our learners with a lot of the language. Other words that come up less frequently, that's when they need the ability to be able to sound them out as they go through. This is just a text taken from one of our books of this level. Someone's curious about pony. If I have time at the end, you can ask me that question. I'm not quite sure what you mean. Sorry. If you could elaborate, I'd be grateful. In this text, normal kind of, for this kind of level, when learners are still learning to read, there's a total of 44 words. Of those 44 words, 26 of them are what we would call sight words, very common words that we can learn at just by looking. Only 18 of them would actually need sounding out because they're not likely to have come across them before. For example, smoothie, banana, not very common, yummy, things like that. But the majority of the words are functional words from that list I showed you. In fact, almost all of them are there, I think, apart from the word any, if I remember correctly. The first 25 most common words there are already in the text. So you can see that by building up these sight words, just by simply looking, sounding it out, explaining what it is, practicing that, learners get a lot of access to text. They can start to see the relationship between words. They can start to guess a little bit more from context if they have those words. So along with dealing with the basics of the alphabet, the basic sounds of the language, please also think about teaching them sight words as well. Slowly, a few each time, yeah, so that you can build up their reading competence. I think that's very important as well. Now, just to kind of bring this to a close, because we've got about 10 minutes or so, I just want to talk about some games and things that we suggest that you might want to try to practice things like some sounds of letters and also some of the sight words as well. In fact, some of them can be used interchangeably. Here we have, for example, a dice game. No money is involved. It's not illegal. Okay, let's leave that on the screen and just go to this question here. Pony is a small horse. Pony derives from the Old French. Yeah. We have many words in English that would be derived from Norse French, thanks to William the Conqueror in 1066. But I'm saying that a lot of English is, as you well know, it's a hodgepodge of all kinds of influences, which was kind of, how can I say, the rough edges were knocked off it because you had different populations living very close to each other. So, for example, in the north of England, very occupied by the Vikings for a very long period of time, you had Saxon speakers, Celts, in the lower half of England. And in those areas where they met, a lot of the difficult aspects of language, like inflections, for example, kind of get knocked off because they had to communicate with each other. And you eventually get this language, which becomes English. Although there are still some strong dialectical forms in the north of England where some of those, that Viking influence is stronger felt, both in place names and in terms of pronunciation. Also, this thing, also, this explains, if the word pony from French, this explains why we have different words for meat and animals in English. So, for example, we use the word pork, but the animal is pig. Pig, Old English word. Pork from the French. Why? Because it was the English people who grew it and the French speakers who ate it. And this has come on into English as well. And this goes with a lot of meat, by the way. But let's get back to our game. Thank you for those distracting questions. I love chatting with teachers. So with colleagues, basically. Someone else has a question. I mean, whether the Y at the end of the word is a long sound. Actually, that's a localized thing. I would say pony. Okay, but some other people would say pony and shorten it. It really is a regional thing there, I'm afraid. Best thing there is to check with the dictionary, with the IPA, and look for the standardized pronunciation. My feeling is it is slightly longer, pony, okay? But some people, I'm going to get my pony. It depends. So here we have a game where we have some sight words, maybe like from flashcards or what have you, and we associate them with a number, and learners have to throw the dice and write down the sight word that comes up, just one dice, write down the sight word that comes up, and they have to try to have written them all down. Now, of course, towards the end, that gets difficult because they'll keep rolling the same number. So it's a kind of competition to see who can write down the sight words the fastest. So we're getting learners used to writing sight words down. Activities to balance out both pronouncing words and recognizing words we're going to talk about a bit now. Here, for example, you find these activities in books, but I wanted to add a little bit extra to it. So, for example, here you're just identifying the long I sound. Now, please notice the final question. Can you see a pattern? Okay, now we're not expecting our learners to be linguists, but for example, in all the long I sound words here that have been circled for you, it's in a medial position, so it's in the middle of a word. Yeah, in many of them, you have the magic E there as well, not exclusively, but in many of them. So what you're getting learners to do is to read with intent, to focus on the word and explore it just that little bit more, to look at relationships. Yeah. So if you do exercises like this, and you'll find them in a number of, from a number of different sources, try and tag on that question there. Can you see a pattern? It may be that there's not a very clear one, but usually at these levels, there is something to be gleaned. Now, I'm not saying that they're going to find the rule, but just start noticing the pattern so that if they come across a word that has a similar structure, but they're not familiar with, when they sound it out, they can start guessing what it's likely to be. Okay, I agree that, you know, it's a question of possibilities. But if they've seen, for example, you have an I and then further on you have the E there, they're going to be fairly sure it's the long sound. 9 times out of 10, they'll probably be right. Okay, so get them to start looking at this so they can start making guesses when they come to unknown words. Okay, I'm going to show you another couple of physical activities to finish off with. So I'm just going to zoom through some things here. Looking through the book to find words that we've looked at, for example, the sight words or anything that we've done in our phonics. Going through a text to see if we can identify it is always a great way of just reinforcing the connection, especially with sight words. Okay, so you've taught them who can find examples of them, just so we remember them. Always good when you're pre-reading a text. I'm not going to go to the theory. I'm going to go to the last final exercises because about 4 minutes. So, for example, oh, this is a nice physical one. I really like this one. I'm going to try and demonstrate it. I can't really see myself right now, and I really do need to see myself to make sure I'm in camera. So I'm going to have to hope that I am. So, okay. This one is about teaching them about things below the line, letters that go below the line, letters that stay on the line, and letters that go higher. Now, there's an activity we do a bit later on. Basically, it's a kind of word gym exercise. So learners are asked to demonstrate, I don't know if you can see that. Learners are asked to demonstrate with their hands as they sound out words. So for example, if I was spelling my name, and again, I'm hopeful, I can't see myself. I'm trying to find where my image is. Nope, can't find it at all. So for example, if I was spelling out my name, it's a capital, so it's kind of big. So it would be S, I'd raise my hand, yeah? T is also high, move my hand across. E is on the line, hand goes down, yeah? Now, if you have a word that has, for example, let's take an example from the screen, below. Below starts B, that goes down to the E, up to the L, down to the L. So you can have them actually shaping the letters as they sound them out to demonstrate that they remember how it's written. Yeah, it's a nice little physical activity as well there. Okay, all righty. Let's have a look at other ones. Let's finish on this. I'll explain them to finish. You can do this with individual letters, or you can do this with sight words. A quick game of bingo. Yeah, you just write a number of words on the board. The students take a grid, they make a selection of 9, either letters or words, and then you just randomly call them out, and it's a game of bingo. But you're associating sound, image, etc. Cardboard letters, this is great for tactile one. So you letter shapes in a bag or a box, and learners pick them out with their eyes closed, and they have to identify what letter it is. This is a great one for learners who learn in a more tactile way. Letter salad. And this is basically where learners have to move around the classroom, prepare the cards with the letters, all the sight words, put them in a box, move from pupil to pupil, let each one take out a card from the box. So they all take a card, and then you call out either the letter or the sight word, and those who have picked it out of the box have to get up and move somewhere else. And the whole classroom has to kind of move around when they're, it's a bit like a kind of bingo idea, but just with one word or with one letter. Then you have snap, you know how that works, 2 sets of whatever it is you're practicing, and the learners turn over the card until both either the same letter or the same word appear, and they do that. And then of course things like what's missing, so you write words on the board, you get learners to close their eyes, there we go, and then you just take away a word or a flashcard or whatever, and they have to remember it. And this again is about getting them to visualize the words, getting them to see them in their heads and the shape of those words in their heads as well. Now, there are a number of, you can find other games like this online, but what I'm trying to point out is that it should not be a purely academic exercise when we're learning these things. You can do fun things when they get older and more experienced, like looking for words within words. So highlight an animal in education. Obviously, this is at a slightly higher level. You've got cat in there, highlight a type of metal, iron, highlight a final part, end, highlight a part of the body, ear, highlight a 3-letter word, a 3-letter verb, use. Okay, so what we're doing again is just getting learners to really look at words. Any activity you can think of that really gets them to focus on the individual segments of words is always good. And finally, if you really want to confuse them, you can give them this word and ask them how it's pronounced. This is just to finish off with. Some of you may have seen this. Do any of you know? Yeah, it's fish. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's always good to throw at learners. Yeah, I've used it as well. So you've got the F from the GH, as in tough, for example. You've got the I, as in women, the O sound, and the TI as in station, etc. So you can actually pronounce that word as fish. I wouldn't suggest you do, but you possibly could. And that's how much fun the English language is. So to summarize very quickly, if we're going to teach them to read and write, it's probably better to start with sounds and the letter associations rather than rushing to just naming the alphabet. That should be done systematically. It should be done going from the most common to the least common. And then we get our learners to really interact with it and look at things closely and recognize relationships, etc., etc., etc. I'm going to stop there and thank you very much for your patience. I know that was kind of a lot of stuff, but I really wanted to talk about methodology for a change. I don't know if there are any questions. I'm happy to answer any if I can. If I can't, then I'll happily try and get you an answer for later on. I was very glad to spend time with you today. I'm going to stop sharing there because I'm taking up the whole screen. And now I can see lots of lovely faces again. There we go. And not just mine. It really was great to be with you guys again today. Thank you so much.